Sisters and brothers, again, let me thank you for coming tonight. My name is Barry Latucci. I'm the CEO of Jasenovac's Research Institute. Today is April 26th, 2015. 4 days ago marked exactly 70 years since that historic day in 1945, April 22nd, 1945, when the last of the 1,000 or so starving survivors of Jasenovac made their breakout, their prison breakout. I must remind you that on that day, that very cold day and rainy and snowy day, of April 22nd, 1945, when they decided to make their breakout, they knew they had to make that breakout because otherwise they would have all been killed. The day before, the women prisoners, the remaining women prisoners, had been murdered. And so there were only 1,000 or so of these poor, starving prisoners, and they decided to break out. They decided that they would throw their bodies against machine gun fire, against rifle fire, against barbed wire. They knew that they would die by the hundreds. The vast majority of them would die. And yet they did it because they knew that they had to do it, because they wanted to make sure that at least one of them would survive so that they could tell the world what happened in the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, particularly in the third or fourth largest camp in all of the Holocaust, Jasenovac, so that they could tell the world. And a few, maybe 150 or so, did survive. And now we know the story that some 600 or 700,000 people, Serbs, Jews, Romas, and anti-fascists, were murdered at Jasenovac from 1941 to 1945, and that it was a triple genocide, and it was the worst crimes of genocide ever committed in the Balkans, and among one of the worst crimes ever committed in all of human history. And yet, very few people knew about it until recently. That's why we started the Jasenovac Research Institute, to educate the world, to make it possible so that there could be meetings like this, that there could be commemorations like this. Because, my friends, commemorating the victims, our martyrs and our heroes who fought and died in the Holocaust, is not simply an educational event. It is not simply a commemorative event. It's about our biological survival. It is about our survival as peoples, Serbs, Jews, Romas. We cannot survive unless we make sure that the truth is known and that we make it clear to the world that there shall never happen again to us, and that we make it known that we shall not be demonized. We will fight anti-Semitism, and we will fight anti-Serbianism, and we will fight anti-Romaism everywhere in the world. And the only way we can do it is by beginning with a simple act like this, coming together on the 70th anniversary of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, on the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Jasenovac by the starving prisoners. We have a very, very wonderful panel of speakers. We have survivors, we have historians, we have activists, we have poets, we have Romas, Serbs, Jews, survivors. It's an honor for me to be among these people and to be with you tonight. We believe that Holocaust denial and the suppression of the truth about Jasenovac is a crime of race hatred. And not only that, it is also the very most difficult thing for us to confront. We must bring the truth out, and we must do so, and that's why our organization does this. And we also are very proud to have with us historians who have recently written books, like Professor Raphael Israeli from Jerusalem University, and also Professor Rob McCormick from University of South Carolina, as well as other distinguished guests. So I don't wish to speak too much longer right now, but I want us to remember that the victims, that our brothers and sisters, our parents, grandparents, our relatives, our blood relatives who died at Jasenovac died for us, and that we can't forget that. And the least we can do is remember what happened there and make the world remember and make this commemoration an important event. Bring it to the center of people's discussion. Make people aware of what happened here tonight, that we had this discussion. And I thank you again for coming. I wish to begin by introducing the Consul General of Serbia, the Honorable Ms. Mirjana Živković, who will say a few words on behalf of the government of Serbia. Thank you, Mirjana.
Good evening, dear friends. As an official representative of the Republic of Serbia in New York, I have a great honor and privilege to address to this magnificent gathering. Instead of just having a commemoration that we have had in the previous 13 years, hosted by St. Sava Serbian Orthodox Church, today we have a conference devoted to Jasenovac. With this conference, we will be remembering the victims of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia on the 70th anniversary of liberation of Jasenovac. I have to express my gratitude to Jasenovac Research Institute, particularly to Barry Letucci, for organizing this event, and also to Father Jokan Majstorovic, and to all other volunteers who gave their contribution to this conference. The historical experience of the 20th century has revealed that the lessons from the history are not learned without the struggle, and this conference is a clear representation of that struggle, as here we want the future generation to remember and never repeat mistakes from the past. Without an institution like Jasenovac Research Institute, it would be easy for those who would like to forget or even to deny horrible death camp atrocities of Jasenovac. Denial of the Holocaust and of the crimes of genocide committed against Serbs, Jews, Romani in the Balkans during the 1941 until 1945 is still present, even though there are so many documents about it. Allow me to quote the words of the great man, Simon Wiesenthal, a man who devoted his life to hunting down Nazi war criminals. The crimes of the fascist Ustaše against the Serbs in the notorious camp of Jasenovac must be known. Crimes that are the worst one along with those committed against the Jews in the Holocaust. Well, today we reflect the 70 years that have passed, sending a strong message to the world that we haven't forgot and that we are passing on our dedication to the future generation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Consul General. Before we go any further, I must introduce my colleague and friend, Father Jokan Majstorovic of St. Sava Serbian Orthodox Cathedral, who will say a few words of welcoming, because we have jointly organized this event for the past 14 years. So we're very grateful to Father Jokan for all of the work and his commitment to remembering the victims of the Holocaust throughout all of this period. So none of this would have been possible without his support. Father Jokan Majstorovic.
Thank you, Barry. Dear brothers and sisters, for all of you that are now in the season of Easter, I just want to greet you all with Christ is risen. The same greetings goes to all our martyrs of the Christian Orthodox faith. Christ is risen. This is a victory that we look for, all of us and every religion, has victory in the future life, in life everlasting. So we are gathered here today to commemorate and to remember the way thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people have been slaughtered. All ages, all professions, all different races, different religions. I remember, and I have to commend Jasenovac Research Center, and especially Barry. I remember 14 years ago how we gathered together in our church hall. Small number of people. It wasn't, we were not very happy with it, but we were very happy that we had much more survivors. We had more survivors at the time. But today, I see a few survivors because God called them, but I see the hall almost full. And I'm so pleased to see these faces from different races and different colors that came here to support the noble idea and noble cause to remember those heroes and martyrs who gave their lives for justice, for freedom, and for us, as we do say. So once again, I congratulate Mr. Latucci, and I give a great credit for his efforts, and all of you that find the time to dedicate and to contribute to this wonderful cause that Jasenovac Research Center is undertaking. May the Lord God bless you, Barry, and all the directors. May the Lord God bless our survivors and keep them with us among us to witness more and more. And may the Lord God bless all of you here present and your families and friends. And may God protect us and save us from the things what happened to our ancestors. God bless you.
Thank you, Father Jokan. Thank you. Thank you very much. And before I go on and introduce the first speaker, I also want to thank our directors who have made many contributions and who have helped us tremendously, other directors of JRI, including our Dr. Alkali, but also Dr. Angelo D'Angelo, Dr. Norman Markowitz, and James Yarker, Louis Dewitt. I want to mention, I hope I haven't left anyone out, have I? And of course, especially Joy Jangdari. I would like you all to give a warm round of applause because she is really primarily responsible for this event tonight. She has really been the prime mover in making this event something special, and I hope in the future her talents as a coordinator and as an organizer will be put to use to make further events, because our work is only beginning here tonight. So thank you, Joy. Thank you very much. I hope you've all had a chance to look at the brochures. I hope you will get a chance to read the brochures, the journal. Something that I wrote in the journal, which I think is very important, is for us to remember that Holocaust, as I said, Holocaust commemoration and education is a very important political act. It's about our survival as peoples. It's also about the struggle for justice, as Father Jokan has said, but the struggle also against racism, against anti-Semitism, against anti-Serbianism. It's a universal struggle for justice. So what we are doing is a very progressive political act here today by coming here today. And so I thank you all as brothers and sisters. I want to now begin the proceedings by introducing our first speaker, who is a survivor, Dr. René Alcalay. I'll just say a few words because I'm sure he'll speak for himself very well. That he comes from one of the most famous families, perhaps the most famous Jewish family in the history of the Balkans, a family that was famous as being the lead, the chief rabbis in Yugoslavia and in Serbia, in Bosnia, and also being prominent members in the foundation of the Zionist movement in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Dr. Alcalay has certainly continued on that great tradition by his work today. And so we thank him. And without further ado, Dr. Alcalay.
Thank you, Barry. I do want the podium. Thank you. I'll begin with the three words that I've learned in Serbian because I don't speak Serbian, and that's Drago, Braho I Sestre. Dear brothers and sisters. You know, the people in times of crisis very often cannot get through crisis without some sense of humor. One of the books that I remember I enjoyed greatly was a book called Laughter in Hell. It tells how Jewish people had humor to get through one of the most horrific times in history. And every people has their own particular quality, their own particular nature. So one of the qualities of Jews is that we're always worried about the well-being of everyone. We want to know that everyone is okay. So one of the stories that comes out of that book is two Jews are hiding in the woods with rifles, and they're going to be assassinating Hitler because Hitler always drives by this particular road. And they're waiting, and the time comes when he's going to drive by, but he doesn't show up. And so they're waiting and waiting. Night begins to fall. They have the rifles ready. Finally, it's dark, and one Jew turns to the other and he says, I hope nothing happened to him. You know, this is the quality of Jewish people. We're always worried about everyone. My friends, my dear brothers and sisters, whenever I speak about the Holocaust, the Shoah, I feel a profound sense of humility. In addition to a great sense of loss and pain, I'm reminded of how my mother tried to protect me when I was a child. I'm reminded of my father, who I never had the chance to know. He died in Jasenovac, of my uncles and cousins who died in Jasenovac, those members of my family that were taken away, and of a childhood unlived. I don't remember a childhood. These were not painful at the time, because like all living creatures, in such impossible conditions, my response was to shut down. I was a year old when we went into a concentration camp. Not Jasenovac, or I would not be here speaking to you. My mother and I survived. My emotions, as the wounds of early childhood deepened, shut down. It was not until many years later that the enormity of the pain flooded into me and overwhelmed what had remained of a wounded psyche. As I realized what had occurred in our lives, it was at first very personal, something that had happened to us. My mother spoke a great deal about her early childhood, her courtship with my father, Joseph, her marriage, my birth. She spoke about her brother Kurt and how much she loved him. And very briefly, she spoke about my father's death in Jasenovac, about the Kraljevica and Rab camps, the two camps that we survived, and the many other family members that we lost. But as I read and learned more about my Jewish heritage and the history of our people, I became increasingly aware that there are things in Jewish history that are terrible in the extreme. I became an avid student of history and discovered the brutality of people and found it hard to reconcile with the teaching that my mother had transmitted. You see, in spite of what we had endured, my mother transmitted a message of love and compassion for human beings that transcended the brutality for human beings and the inhumanity that came to me out of the pages of history. Dachau, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, Jasenovac. How do we really speak about these places? Our words create boundaries, and from these boundaries we can distance ourselves. We can distance ourselves from the experience of Jews, Roma, Serbs in the former Yugoslavia, an experience that repeats itself throughout history and that continues today with people of many nationalities, many religions and cultures. The Jews were not the only victims, but there was a singular element in the Shoah that is inescapable, namely that there were many victims who were not Jewish. This is true. But it's equally true that the Jews were singled out for extermination in a war of genocidal extinction. The Shoah is important for us for the universal lessons that it provides. Looking at our world and toward the future, we see holocausts and genocides taking place all around us. The world at large remains silent. Remembering the Shoah means that we not remain silent, that we speak out about our brothers and sisters, about our children, regardless of their color, creed, religion, or nationality. My mother, during her lifetime, bore witness, and I continue her message of being a witness. Having been a very young child, if I live long enough, I may well be among the last of that generation. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan said, "The United Nations emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust." He also reminded us, a UN that fails to be at the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, denies its history and undermines its future. On the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Nuremberg Principles, which became the forerunner of international humanitarian and criminal law, on the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, on the 64th year since the coming into effect of the Genocide Convention, the Never Again Convention, we have to ask ourselves, what have we learned and what must we do? What are the lessons that we must learn? The answer to these questions appeared in an article in the Jerusalem Post. There are 6 vital lessons. First, the importance of Holocaust remembrance, the responsibility of memory. The first lesson is the importance of the Jewish principle of Zachor. Zachor means to remember, the duty of remembrance itself. For as we remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Shoah, the Romans and the Serbs, that were defamed, demonized, and dehumanized as prologue or justification for genocide, we have to understand that the mass murder of 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jews is not a matter of abstract statistics. Each of these persons had a name. Each person had an identity. Each person was a universe. Our sages in my religion tell us, whoever saves a single life, it is as if he or she had saved an entire universe. Just as whoever has killed a single person, it is as if they have killed an entire universe. And so the abiding imperative that we are each, wherever we are, the guarantors of each other's destiny. Second, the danger of state-sanctioned incitement to hatred and genocide, the responsibility to prevent. The enduring lesson of the Holocaust is that the genocide of European Jewry succeeded not only because of the industry of death and the technology of terror, but because of the state-sanctioned ideology of hate. This teaching of contempt, this demonizing of the other, this is where it all began. As the Canadian courts affirmed in upholding the constitutionality of anti-hate legislation, the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began with words. These, as the court put it, are the chilling facts of history. These are the catastrophic effects of racism. The Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began with words. As the UN marks the commemoration of the Holocaust, we're witnessing yet again state-sanctioned incitement to hate and genocide all around the world. The danger of silence, the consequence of indifference, the responsibility to protect. The genocide of European Jewry succeeded not only because of the state-sanctioned culture of hate and industry of death, but because of crimes of indifference, because of conspiracies of silence. We've already witnessed an appalling indifference and inaction in our own day, which took us down the road to the unspeakable, the genocide in Rwanda. Unspeakable because this genocide was preventable. No one can say that we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Just as we knew and did not act to stop the genocide by attrition in Darfur. This is happening right now. Indifference and inaction always mean coming down on the side of the victimizer, never on the side of the victim. Indifference in the face of evil is acquiescence with evil itself. Fourth, combating mass atrocity and the culture of impunity, the responsibility to bring war criminals to justice. If the 20th century symbolized by the Holocaust was the age of atrocity, it was also the age of impunity. Few of the perpetrators were brought to justice, and so just as there must be no sanctuary for hate, no refuge for bigotry, there must be no base or sanctuary for these enemies of humankind, such as President al-Bashir of Sudan. He continues to be welcomed in international fora. The responsibility to talk truth to power. If the Holocaust proved anything, it is that a person can both love poems and kill children. The Holocaust was made possible not only because of the bureaucratization of genocide, as Robert Lipton put it, but because of the complicity of the elites. Physicians, church leaders, judges, lawyers, engineers, architects, educators. Indeed, one has only to read Gerhard Muller's book on Hitler's justice to appreciate the complicity and criminality of judges and lawyers, or to read Robert Jan van Pelt's book on the architecture of Auschwitz, to be appalled by the minute involvement of engineers and architects in the design of death camps. Holocaust crimes then were also the crimes of the Nuremberg elites. As Elie Wiesel put it, cold-blooded murder and culture did not exclude each other. If the Holocaust proved anything, it is that a person can both love poems and kill children. I don't have much more time to spend with you, so I did have a couple of other lessons that we need to learn from the Holocaust, but I'm going to end my talk. We remember, we trust that never again will we be silent, never again will we be indifferent in the face of evil. May this 70th commemoration of Jasenovac be not only an act of remembrance, but a remembrance to act. In conclusion, I've shared these thoughts with you in memory of my father and my family members who lost their lives in the Shoah, in memory of Jews, Romas, and Serbs who died in Jasenovac, but most of all, in memory of my mother Annie, who would want me to do no less than to bear witness and to live the lessons that have come out of the Shoah. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Before I introduce our next speaker, who is also a survivor and a dear friend of ours, Eva Kostabel, I do want to inform you that His Excellency, the President of Bosnia, Mladen Ivanic, was expected to be here tonight, but unfortunately he was unable to attend, but he sent me this letter, and I'll read it to you now, a short letter. Distinguished friends, 70 years have passed since the Holocaust ended, but the terror of those atrocious events, still keeps us returning deeply into the history. It is well known that the investigation of Jasenovac is dedicated to unveiling the truth of the Holocaust in the territory of former Yugoslavia, as well as to supporting the research. He's speaking about Jasenovac's Research Institute. We consider it
of utmost importance to mention the historical context of Jasenovac in every serious discussion on genocide, war crimes, and human rights in the territory of former Yugoslavia and the Balkans. And we strongly support the striving of JRI to place Jasenovac in the broader context of the Holocaust and to become an indisputable part of the scholarship of other genocides throughout history. This horrendous crime of genocide must not and should never be forgotten. The victims of this genocide and all who suffered it oblige us to involve more actively so that they can receive the needed justice. We appreciate greatly your efforts in improving cooperation between peoples of the Balkans aimed at the quest for justice and peace and prosperity in the region, and in promoting the understanding between the Serbs and other nations based on universal ideals of justice and reconciliation. With utmost respect toward your endeavor tonight, Mladen Ivanic, Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you, President Ivanic. Without further ado, I want to introduce our dear friend Eva Deutsch-Kostabel, who will be our next presenter. Eva is a survivor who went through the camps, but of course her father was taken from her and killed. He wasn't killed in Jasenovac, Treblinka, I believe, but in any case, she went through the horrors of Ustasha, Croatia, the independent state of Croatia under the Croatian fascists from 1941 to 1945 as a young adult. And so I wish you would welcome our dear friend Eva Deutsch-Kostabel.
You want to put this here? No? Dragi prijatelji, nažalost, moj srpsko-hrvatski je jako slab, jer sam napustila Jugoslaviju kad sam bila 16 godina stara, a sad sam u Americi 64 godina. Dakle, ja ću govoriti na engleski. Every person, tell me if you can hear me well or not. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Every person who survived is a miracle. And behind every person who survived is a righteous Gentile or somebody who saved their life. Otherwise, we would all be dead. In my case, I was fortunate to be saved by the Italians. I was in 2 Italian concentration camps, and they never killed the Jews. And that's why I'm alive. I would never be alive otherwise. This is Kraljevica and Rab. It's a story in itself. I'm not going to talk to it because it's a wonderful story of humanity. And I asked Barry what I should talk about, because I have a very long life. I'm 90 years old, so I have a very long life, and I didn't know which part I should tell you about my experiences. And I just finished my memoir about my years in Yugoslavia, and Barry gave me the title. And the title is Who Lives in Vukotinovićeva 5, which was the last apartment where we lived in Zagreb. So I took a chapter of my book. There are some chapters I prefer to read to you, but they were too long. I have only 10 minutes, I think, to talk. So I took the shortest one, and it's called The Day We Became Homeless. We were homeless from 1941 to the day we came to New York from 1949. So when I see a homeless person, I'm devastated, because nobody should be without a roof over their head. We were homeless. So I'll read you from a chapter from my book. Hopefully it will be published this year. I hope I find a publisher. I am a published author of children's books, but this is another book, of course. so I'll read it with your permission. I hope you don't get bored. One day in 1941, we heard harsh banging in our front door. Mother opened the door, and 3 Ustascha soldiers stormed inside our home. 3 brutal, cruel, and crude faces started us with blind hatred. One of them pushed a document into my mother's face. That document declared that it was now legal for the fascist state to rob us of our home and all our possessions. The order came directly from Poglavnik Ante Pavelic and the new head of the puppet government of Croatia, who also headed the murderous Ustascha party. On this terrible day, the Ustascha, with their guns pointed at us, come prepared to murder us at the slightest provocation. How could we 3 women, there was my mother and my sister, my father was taken away already, defend ourselves? The Ustascha soldiers ordered us to take but a few necessities and leave our lovely, comfortable home within half an hour. I was about 16 years old, and this was my first encounter with raw hatred. Looking back, I realize now how sheltered my life has been before. I did not have the faintest idea why those strangers should hate us so. What I should take with me, I pondered. I was totally unprepared to make such choices. But how could anyone be prepared? Should I take my collection of costumes, postcards, which I collected? Which of my clothes should I take? We had only half an hour. Should I take my toothbrush, my photos? What will I miss the most? What will happen to my father's fine library? What about our beautiful furniture, specially designed for us in Vienna? We had to leave it all. We had only half an hour to decide. In the frenzy of the moment, I stumbled onto an umbrella stand and smashed it into 1,000 pieces. After I broke the blue vase, one of the Ustascha flew into a wild rage, insisting that I broke this vase on purpose and that broken glass would bring him bad luck. I hope so. I feel the cold steel of the gun pointed at my chest, with the barrel of the gun close to my heart. I realized that the slightest wrong move could end my life at once. The Ustascha was more than ready to pull the trigger. It was an accident, I pleaded. I didn't mean to do it. The Ustascha looked at me with disdain and hatred and then moved the gun away from my heart. My life was spared, at least for now. I found it humiliating to plead for my own life, and the humiliation of this event will forever be etched in my heart. But of course, this was only the beginning of our tragic odyssey. In the days that followed, we experienced fear, hunger, and humiliation. I thought of our neighbors, my schoolmates, and the people I had grown up with. Why didn't they come and help us, the Croatians? The good people of my hometown, Zagreb, where are they now? The whole world forgot us. We were isolated from the rest of the population. We were alone, and we became homeless. Our kindly landlords, a distant relative, Mr. and Mrs. Lustig, had offered us their home as a haven because we would otherwise have been on the street. The sweet Jewish couple had come from New York to retire in Zagreb to spend their golden years with Mr. Lustig's hometown and birthplace. Mr. Lustig had ran in some problems as a youth, and his family shipped him overseas to New York. He had lost one leg in an industrial accident, but he had saved every penny of his hard-earned money and returned it visit to his hometown. There in Zagreb, he had built an elegant apartment house with all of the modern facilities. That's where we lived, in Vukotinovičeva 5, before the Nazis destroyed our lives and turned it upside down forever. The decision to return to Zagreb was proved to be fatal for our kindly elderly landlords. The Croatian Ustaša deported both of these senior citizens to the concentration camp, never to be heard from them again, and of course stole the apartment house. The Croatians knew no mercy, no compassion, even though they were devoted Catholics. I must point out a very shameful thing for my family, that Ante Pavelić was the brother-in-law of my uncle Robert Weinberger. So this is nothing to be proud of. Now in 2015, I still wonder who lives in Vukotinovičeva 5. Are they direct descendants of those brutal Ustaša, or maybe their friends? Croatian and the Bosnians were among the most brutal murderers of the Nazi era. And our president, Bill Clinton, bombed the innocent Serbs and supported the Bosnian and the Croatian, which is forever a shame what he did. I never voted for him again. He better never return to Serbia, because they consider him a war criminal, which he is. The Croatian never paid for their unspeakable crimes, and they never paid for our stolen property either. We are still waiting for the thugs to be brought to justice. How quickly did the Croatians murder and rob their victims, and how slow is the justice for the murdered victims. Now in 2015, the Croatians celebrated the birth of the monster Ante Pavelić. This is now they did that in my hometown Zagreb. And many of the streets in Zagreb are called after the war criminals. They had no remorse for the beastly deed. Thank you for being patient with me.
Eva, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That's a wonderful memoir and a wonderful observations. And it's true that the suppression of the truth about the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, I don't know if it would have prevented some of the worst intervention and bombings that went on in the 1990s, but I think it would have made it more difficult if the truth about the Holocaust had been known and it was understood that Serbs were the victims of the Holocaust along with Jews and Romas, that Jews, Romas, and Serbs shared the same graves. They died in the same camps. They suffered the same fate in Yugoslavia during World War II. I don't think it would have been possible to demonize the Serbs if we had this organization then. So we have to take ownership of this. We have to take ownership of our own history and of our own destinies, and that's why we're here tonight. I wish to introduce our next speaker. We're very proud to have with us tonight Dr. Raphael Israeli from Jerusalem University, who has written a wonderful book, The Death Camps of Croatia, which is available at our literature table at the end of, in the back of the room. Without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Raphael Israeli from Jerusalem.
Thank you, Barry. And I am honored to be with you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. following on what the consul said, that she wanted to say a few words, I wish to say that I would say also a few words before I say something in a minute. And the few words that I want to say simply are, I'm inspired by the setting, you around the table having dinner and so on. Would you stop that, please? It disturbs, okay? The few words that I want to say refer to the founder of the State of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, and this topic is not totally irrelevant to what we have to say tonight. The story is that during the British Mandate, which ruled Palestine before the State of Israel, from 1918 to 1948, 30 years, there was a governor of the area of Palestine by a British High Commissioner. And it is said that one day he invited Mr. Ben-Gurion, who was then the head of Jewish Agency. Later on, he became the Prime Minister of Israel. He invited him to a dinner like that, and there were people around the table and so on and so forth. Mr. Ben-Gurion came to the dinner with his open shirt, like me, and he put his jacket on the back of the seat. It was a very hot day. So the High Commissioner sent him a note, Mr. Ben-Gurion, how dare you do that in the presence of all these notables around the table? And Ben-Gurion sent back a note saying, Mr. High Commissioner, I got permission for this from your own Prime Minister. It was Mr. Churchill at the time. Okay, so he accepted. What could he do? But after dinner was over, the High Commissioner approached Mr. Ben-Gurion and said, Mr. Ben-Gurion, I accept your explanation, but how come that Mr. Churchill should have given you permission for this kind of scandalous behavior? So he said, Mr. High Commissioner, I can tell you, last year I was in London for Jewish Agency Affairs, and Mr. Churchill was very kind. He was the Prime Minister then. He invited me for dinner. And during dinner time, it was very hot. So I took my jacket off and put it on the back of the seat. And Mr. Churchill sent me a note saying, Mr. Ben-Gurion, you can do that in Palestine with the High Commissioner, not here. So now, Mr. Akalai, just before me, mentioned two words about which I want to say a brief comment. Justice, everybody wants justice. And the second thing is about worry, that Jews worry very much. And indeed, there is, I know from my own family story, that one day a Jewish family receives a telegram before the days of the fax. In that telegram said a couple of words, start worrying, details in the mail. So, I mean, Jews have to worry in any case. Now, when we speak about justice, what is justice? Justice for whom? Sometimes you do justice for one, you do injustice to the other. And therefore, I want just to warn that justice, when you demand justice, it's not an absolute term. Because justice, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And very often, this business of justice, it sounds very nice and very appealing, but I think it's not practical because it has so many interpretations. I am reminded of a very famous lawyer who represented his client in court, and after the verdict was pronounced, he sent a cable to his client saying, justice has won. And he got a cable back from his client saying, appeal immediately. So I know justice is very, very doubtful notion, and it can lean this way or that way. Now, I am going to the something that I wanted to say after the few words. The something is, in principle, it is that the Jasenovac or the Yugoslavian problem, especially during the Holocaust, during the Shoah, is only at its beginning, because as you are all aware, it was silenced and oppressed during the 35 years of Tito's rule in Yugoslavia. And you know why? Because Tito didn't want these controversies between the various nations of Yugoslavia to erupt, because if he let it erupt, Yugoslavia would fall apart immediately. And therefore, nothing was done, and it was oppressed and silenced for 35 years. Only after Tito died and Yugoslavia fell apart anyway into various nations did this propaganda on all sides, I must say, start or erupt in a very violent way. So you hear stories from one party over the other and so on. Now, I have no axe to grind, and when I started to do it, I tried to hear all parties and to understand what each party was talking about. And there are gross distortions of the reality, if anybody can know any reality. For example, there are many issues that are simply still undecided because there are no clear decisions or clear formulas about it. You hear one story and it's reversed, and everybody swears that his version is the right one. And I can give you a long list of topics of that sort which remained controversial exactly as they were to this day. For example, you speak about the Jasenovac problem. Jasenovac is not only a concrete affair. Jasenovac is also a symbol of what happened in Yugoslavia. Because before Jasenovac, and as a precedent, if you like, to it, in preparation to Jasenovac, was Jadovno. And Jadovno, there were terrible horrors that in some ways are more horrible than what happened in Jasenovac, not in scale, because Jasenovac was one of the biggest in terms of sinister production of corpses. It was one of the greatest or the largest concentration camps in Europe, or camps or death camps, as I call them in my book. And but Jadovno was horrible because it included, first of all, the island of Pag, and the island of Pag, they used to open the bellies of live people whom they wanted to kill. They filled the belly with rocks and threw them into the sea so that they should sink in the thing. This they did not do in Jasenovac. They did other things, of course, much larger scales. And in Jadovno itself, in the mountains, there are natural pits. And in those pits, they threw people alive. They tied them in a long rope, one to the other, and since they threw the first one, the whole file that followed them fell one after the other. The lady Eva before me mentioned Zagreb. You know, the Maccabi, that's the Jewish club of Zagreb, the members of the Maccabi club, there were dozens of them, were tied in a rope like that and thrown into a pit in Jadovno, and so all of them perished. Nobody even knows the exact numbers and so on. And therefore, when you speak about Jasenovac, please remember Jadovno. Jadovno and Jasenovac. Of course, Jasenovac, because of the scale, represents the whole thing, symbolizes the whole thing, but there is Jadovno. Now, why do we go from Jadovno to Jasenovac? Because Jadovno operated only during 3.5 months, when the Ustasha started their experiment with mass extermination, first of all of Serbs, of course, definitely, because in the Ustasha policy, there was a slogan that was declared publicly. that of the close to 2 million Serbs who were under the Ustasha administration in both Croatia and Bosnia, it says 1/3 should be converted, of course, into Catholicism, 1/3 should be expelled, and 1/3 should be exterminated. And this is very important to remember, because extermination or genocide or Holocaust, call it what you wish, is not only the actual massacre of people. That actual massacre has to be preceded by an ideology, that you have the intention to do it and then you carry it out. And the Ustasha declared very clearly that their goal was to exterminate 1/3 at least of the Serbs who were under their rule. And they did that in practice, because there were about 1.8 million Serbs in the Ustasha state, and apparently they killed something around 500,000, which is almost 1/3 of what they declared they would do. So that means that Jadovno was a precedent, as I said, was an example. Only the modalities of extermination, of course, changed. And suddenly, when the Italians who came to an agreement with the Nazi authorities and so on, took over the Adriatic area, of course, the Ustasha, who opened Jadovno and operated for 3 months, from April to about, or June to about August 1940, they, of course, immediately closed down the camp. They exterminated all the vestiges. They didn't want to be accused by anybody of having committed those terrible crimes and so on. And they, of course, opened Jasenovac, which was in Ustasha territory, outside the control of the Italians, because, as Eva said, the Italians did not commit this mass murder and so on, and there is vast documentation attesting to that. So we have to be aware of that too. There are, of course, other controversies in the research that has started. For example, the equivalence that many have attempted to do between Pavelic and Nedic. They say, oh, we have our Pavelic, I mean the Croatians, but the Serbs also have their own collaborator with the Nazis, who was Nedic. But of course, as you understand, there is no equivalence, because Nedic collaborated with the Germans, all right, but he was some kind of Vichy or Quisling in Holland, who collaborated with the Germans under compulsion. While in the case of Pavelic, he did it with gusto, because that was his ideology. He wanted to exterminate the Serbs at least as much as the Nazis wanted to exterminate the Jews. So they had a similar ideology. You know, in Jewish tradition, you know that Jews are not supposed to eat pork. So we say that if a Jew is under the threat of death and he is compelled, then he can eat pork in order to rescue his life. But at least if you do it, don't lick your fingers. you are compelled and do it. And here in what I'm trying to describe, while Nedic did it, he ate pork because he had to. In the case of Pavelic, he licked his fingers because he did it with great zeal and with great pleasure. And sometimes the Ustasha were accused and very often stopped in some ways by the Nazis, who scolded them for being overzealous in their activities, and therefore they had to slow down a little bit their activities. And there is, of course, the question of the Archbishop Stepinac, who is accused of collaboration also. He was very close to the Vatican, personally to the Pope. But at the same time, there are a lot of stories about him rescuing Jews. And these mixed stories makes it very difficult today to make a definite decision about whether he was for or anti and so on and so forth. And the whole list of other issues that are far from being decided over and beyond the controversies that existed between the parties and the hatred and so on and so forth. And I submit to you, by the way, that this kind of hatred which exists between the parties not only dates back to the Ottoman Empire, where many Croats or Serbs started under the system of the devshirme to convert to Islam in order to serve the Ottoman government and so on. Not only that, but even the Bosnian War of 1992-95 is still tinged with the taste of what happened during the Holocaust. Because today, when you ask, I did my second book after that about the Bosnian War, you ask today the Bosnians or the Serbs or the Croats during the Bosnian War, every one of them will say, oh, we remember what they did to us during World War II, and this is our way to react and so on. So it means that it's a long story. You cannot isolate the Holocaust time or the Shoah period because it all has deep roots inside the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, it has deep roots. I am told that if I want my speech to become immortal, it doesn't have to be eternal. so I have to stop. So we'll have to wind down. So the main, and therefore because there are so many issues that are not decided, and the research, the systematic and objective and historical research is only at the beginning. And in this regard, I commend Barry for taking this initiative of having this Jasenovac Research Institute, because that will contribute a lot in the coming days. So the whole issue of the rivalry between the British and the Germans, the Nazis in the Balkans, which would have been my main topic of presentation, but then you can see it in the book. It's all very well, in detail. Then I have to conclude by saying that unfortunately the arguments and not only the argument, the bitterness of the argument that are going on when you go to all parties today and try to take evidence on this or that affair, you'll see the controversy, and it's getting worse. Because, for example, in Zagreb, in Croatia in general, there is some revival among the youth of the Ustasha ideas and the Ustasha tradition and so on. So it's going, I think, from bad to worse, and hence the urgency of rescuing historical research from the grip of the propaganda, because otherwise we will forget it all. It reminds me that a former Israeli Minister of Finance, yeah, I'm finishing, the finance said that when I came to the Ministry of Finance, we stood on the verge of the abyss, he said. But since then, we took a big step forward. So I mean, it's nice to take a step forward, but you have to be very, very, very cautious of where you are going. Thank you very much.
That was very entertaining, and it reminds me of when Barry Farber was one of our featured guests. He managed to talk about the Holocaust and at the same time be extremely funny at the same time, which is very difficult. But anyway, thank you. I also failed to mention that Professor Israeli is a very famous author who has published over 50 books and is internationally well known. And so we're delighted that he brought attention to the subject of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia because, as we all know, 20 years ago, nobody was talking about it. Nobody was writing about it. It was a time of suppression of the truth. And now we have people like Dr. Israeli and Dr. McCormick and others who are bringing the truth out and bringing this scholarship to light. We're very, very grateful to them. So thank you, Dr. Israeli. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, and we will have two speakers, and then we will have a break, and we'll have a discussion period, and also we will auction a painting that is being offered tonight as a contribution, as a donation to Jasenovac Research Institute. But our next speaker is our very good friend, Nenad Fogel. And Nenad is the president of the Jewish community of Zemun. Zemun, in case you don't know, is right next door, north of Belgrade, and it is the birthplace of the grandfather of Theodor Herzl. It was of the grandfather. Oh yeah. So it has a very long Jewish tradition and a very interesting tradition in Balkan history. And Nenad is also a good friend because he sponsored an event for JRI in 2006 at a time when we couldn't get anyone to sponsor any event, including the whole Jewish Federation of Serbia. So we were very grateful. Sometimes the politics in the Balkans is such that even what's in the best interests of the people of the Balkans is almost put all the way at the end, and the interest of the politicians comes first. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Nenad Fogel, president of the Jewish community of Zemun in Serbia.
Thank you. I prefer to sit because it's easier for me to read. Good evening, everyone. I will be speaking to you today about the fate of the Jewish community of Zemun in the concentration camps of Stara Gradiška and Jasenovac. On the sixth day upon the enemy invasion of Yugoslavia on April 12, 1941, German occupying troops entered Zemun. Despite the fact that the territory of Zemun was given to the independent state of Croatia, the Germans had absolute control over the city and its administration up to October 1941. German troops, together with the Gestapo, established a close collaboration with local Germans, the Volksdeutschers, who, placing themselves at the disposal of Hitler, became the territory's fifth column. A greater part of the local Germans, who at the time numbered approximately 10,000 in Zemun, had actively organized and prepared their people and stood in readiness for the arrival of German army, perceiving its troops as their liberator. Immediately upon the entering of troops, the Germans appointed the leader of Kulturbund, lawyer Dr. Hans Moser, as mayor of Zemun. Eager in their desire to be of service to the occupying members of the Kulturbund, has set up its organization, the Juden Control of Jews, prior to the arrival of its troops into Zemun. The task of this organization was to gather as much data as possible about the town's Jewish population. The Jews of Zemun were obliged to pay contribution money, and records show that in the accounts of Dr. Hans Moser at the bank in Zemun there was over 1 million dinars of collected contribution. By the notorious Nazi proclamation, the law practically ceased to apply to the Zemun Jews. They were outlawed. Proclamation in the form of bans and obligations regarding Jews follow one upon another. On April 14, 1941, under the threat of death penalty, Jewish men and women were ordered to report to the police for the purpose of determining their ability for physical labor. At the same time, a proclamation stating the bans and obligations imposed on Jews in Zemun point by point was plastered in public places all over the town. Jews must wear a yellow band on their sleeves with the word Jude stamped on it. Jews are banned from approaching and entering all public places. Attending school is prohibited. They are banned from the streets on Sundays. They are forbidden to leave their houses from 8 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock a.m. They are forbidden to gather in groups larger than 5 persons, meaning that the necessary congregation for prayer could not be legally gathered since religious norm requires the presence of 10 men of age. Mandatory forced labor is instituted for Jews. Jews are proscribed from all economic activities. In April 1941, following the imprisonment of part of the Jews, the forced laboring of all the others, the confiscation of businesses and eviction of the majority of Jews from their houses, finally the operation of the Jewish community of Zemun was prohibited. The daily task of forced labor thwarted any possibility of Jews making even a scanty amount of funds to sustain the life of their families. Robbed of their possessions, evicted from their homes and flats, they were all faced with destitute living conditions where each day presented a challenge to live through. It was a struggle to preserve the bare biological minimum for survival. As a rule, forced labor was a 12 hours daily toil where everybody had to secure their own food to live through the day. Jews were taken to a number of forced labor sites. All of them, without exception, worked in units directly for the German army. In the book, The Crimes of the Occupying Forces and Their Collaborators in Vojvodina, it is stated, taking Jews to perform forced labor duties was motivated not only by the fact that their physical strength should be made use of, but it was also a calculated measure to degrade them, torture them, and finally obliterate them. The atrocities performed during the process went beyond all limits of humanity. Once the arrest of Jews decreased in number and forced labor became a daily routine, the fascists managed to lull the Jews into believing that the brunt of their assaults had passed and that nothing worse could befall them. However, the horror came with the dawn of July 27, 1942. An order was proclaimed stating that all Jews were obligated to report to the police command. In truth, the rounding up of Jews had already begun the night before on July 26. A line of Jews was taken to the railway station where they were hauled into cattle wagons that pulled out of Zemun railway station without delay toward Stara Gradiška and Jasenovac camps. The 575 Zemun victims compared to the count of 6 million Jews murdered during World War II may seem to some as marginal. However, once the number is translated into the percentages, it adds up to a total of more than 90% of the Jewish community living in Zemun in 1941. Instead of presenting an account of annihilation of Zemun Jews, I have decided, as the son of one of the rare Zemun Jewish community's war survivors, to leave it to my late father to speak of the torment of camps Jasenovac and Stara Gradiška inmates. I will now cite some parts from the book, The Jewish Community in Zemun, that he wrote a decade ago. This is what Danilo Fogel had to relate about the slaughter of Zemun Jews. One should not refrain from describing even the most horrific scenes as long as there are those who blatantly deny the existence of such atrocities. In Yad Vashem, we found Erwin Rosenberg's statement of all the Zemun Jews who had been deported from Zemun, and in turn in Jasenovac, Erwin was the only survivor. This account of his recollection reveals the horrific daily events that took place in Jasenovac. The daily slave labor inside the camp started at 5:30 in the morning. The inmates were assigned to various jobs, but this was not enough for the Ustashi. They concocted all sorts of punishment, shackle feet in heavy chains being just one of them. For a time, Erwin Rosenberg too had to toil bound in chains. Later, Erwin worked in the so-called chain house, where arms, mostly rifles, were repaired in one part of the plant. According to Erwin Rosenberg's recollection, the inmates were primarily preoccupied with the thought of food and how to obtain it. This fact fully highlights the importance of the packages that arrived from the Zagreb Jewish community, as they were crucial for survival. Throughout was also given to finding ways for brief respites and anything else that would help them stay alive. The one thing that was rarely discussed was the daily killing that took place. In order to better perceive the inferno of Jasenovac, where the Jews of Zemun spent the last day of their life, we cite parts of the statement of Erwin Miller from Vinkovci. The Ustashi killing sprees were an everyday event. At times, the Ustashi would state the reason for the killings, but much of it was just for the fun of it, for arrogance and sheer sadism. There were a number of work groups in the concentration camp assigned to labor on the brick plant, chain plant, the tannery, kitchen, etc. At the time Erwin Miller was working in the brick-making plant, some 20 Jews were brought to Jasenovac from some provisional concentration camp. They remained in the plant for about half an hour to warm up and were then taken away by the Ustashi. That night, together with a group of 20 young prisoners, Erwin was assigned to dig out a large pit. They worked in silence, tense and full of apprehension. They had no way of knowing whether they were digging up their own grave. When a pit of sufficient depth was dug up, the Ustashi took the group of diggers to a large pile of corpses and ordered them to throw the bodies into the pit and cover them up. The back of the heads on all the corpses had been smashed in. Among that, he recognized the men that had warmed themselves in the brick plant that day. During winter, the inmates appreciate working in a brick plant or the kitchen because they were only places where they could warm up from the bitter cold. It was strictly forbidden for any other prisoner to approach or even venture near the brick plant. However, a number of inmates could not resist to want to warm up just a little, so they would stop for a minute outside the brick plant. On one occasion, an Ustashi officer caught two inmates near the brick plant. He brought them inside, and to punish them, he ordered that they be rolled up inside a batch of fresh bricks and led into the kiln and burnt alive with the batch. Their screams were heard for some time, and then everything was quiet. It seemed that the Ustashi enjoyed the show very much, so that it was frequently played anew from that day on. It was the middle of 1943. The notorious performance was on. The Ustashi officers strode past the lineup of inmates. A special chosen intellectual disabled inmate walked beside him. Whoever the inmate pointed to was taken out to the line to be killed. Everyone was filled with fear and apprehension, standing there waiting for the life or death decision. The inmates walk in front of the lineup, and the blood freezes inside each poor man standing there facing him. Who will he point his finger at? However bizarre it might seem, the finger of the colleague turns into the finger of fate. Finally, the finger of the inmate pointed to Josip Vogel from Zemun. In the same instant, Josip, ridden with fear, panicked and made run for it. Shots were fired, and a bullet hit him in the head. Although wounded, he continued to run With a cloth wrapped around his head, he even managed to hide inside the camp for some time, despite the wound he had sustained. In the days that followed, to those he came across, he would say, "I am still young to die." At the time, he was 20 years old. Eventually, the Ustashi found him out and promptly slashed his throat. It was my uncle. The Jewish women and children of Zemun were separated from the men and taken to Stara Gradiška. One Jasenovac inmate, a textile expert sent to that camp, Stara Gradiška, to organize the tearing up of old rags, was present at the time the Jewish women from Zemun reached the camp. On returning to Jasenovac, he told a number of inmates what he had witnessed, and thus the following event has been committed to memory. Women and children were entering through the open gate. Among the women was Mariana Sasson. The people of Zemun remember her as an honored citizen of Zemun and the owner of two tobacco shops, one in the marketplace and the second in the center of the town. Passing through the gate, Mariana began to cry. A female Ustashi, Maria Burzan, came up to her forward and slit her throat in front of the shocked women, shouting, "Oh, you sniveling old hag." Seeing her mother slaughtered before her very eyes, Mariana's daughter, Judita Sasson, burst into tears. "Well now," Maria Burzan shouted, "you dare cry too," and instantly slit Judita's throat. One could go on with such horrific events and scenes for a long, long time. However, the few events told are sufficient to give one a feeling of how the inmates of Jasenovac live and die. Among them were all the Zemun Jews brought to the death camps in cattle wagons in July 1942. Like nowhere else in occupied Europe, the Jews of Yugoslavia took a proactive role in the battle against enemy occupying forces. Many who managed to escape the pogrom and the deportation of the Jewish population became active soldiers of the People's Liberation War. A total of 4,572 Jews fought in partisan units. Of this number, 1,318 fell in the struggle for freedom. The Yugoslav partisan movement was the first organized force in Europe that fought actively against the occupying forces. We note with pride that the small Jewish community contributed to the country's liberation, giving 10 heroes of war of the People's Army, 14 generals, and 150 recipients of the 1941 Partisan Medal who fought from the first organized battles right up to the country's liberation in 1945. The fate of Zemun Jews can be taken as a blueprint of the way set forth throughout occupied Europe for the annihilation of the entire Jewish nation. At the outset, Jews were stripped of all their civil rights, upon which their entire property was seized. After that, they were submitted to mandatory forced labor. Finally, the entire population was transported into camps where the ultimate act was carried out, their execution. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will have more speakers. We will also have these papers and these presentations published in the coming months. We're going to put them together in a small book and have them ready at least, I hope, by the end of this year, or certainly before the next commemoration. So we'll be able to appreciate these at our leisure. Our next speaker, before we have the break, and we're going to have a break after this speaker, is a very distinguished historian from Serbia, Jovan Mirković. Mr. Mirković has been for a long time one of the most important scholars of Jasenovac and of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia, someone who has also published a wonderful bibliography a number of years ago on the entire literature of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. He will be presenting in Serbian, and Ms. Aneta Lalic will translate every few minutes, a portion of that presentation. So please welcome Jovan Mirković.
Hvala, Bari. Moje izlaganje je naslovljeno zločini nad Srbima u nezavisnoj državi Hrvatskoj s posebnim osvrtom na stradanje dece u nezavisnoj državi Hrvatskoj. Ono je bazirano na mojoj posljednjoj knjizi Zločini u nezavisnoj državi Hrvatskoj, fotomonografija. Izlaganje je napravljeno kao PowerPoint prezentacija. Prezentacija traje 13 minuta i 2 minute će gospođa Lalić pročitati samo uvodni tekst.
Good evening, everyone. Professor Jovan Mirković asked me kindly to read his presentation, and afterwards you will see the video presentation, and I thank Vasil for the help. Dear friends, living in the windy corner of the Balkans, on the civilization and religious line of contact, interchange and conflict between the East and West, the Serbian people has experienced enormous suffering throughout its history, especially in the 20th century. The Serbian national and religious body has been exposed to annihilation and crimes that are in international law called the crimes against humanity, war crimes and crimes of genocide, which represents the gravest form of crimes against humanity. The most atrocious crimes against the Serbian people, aimed at its complete extermination, were committed during the Second World War in the independent state of Croatia. The independent state of Croatia was organized on the ideological basis of the Ustaša movement, aimed at creating a pure Croatian living space, which was to enable the existence of a pure Croatian nation. The precondition for this achievement of this aim was the biological destruction of both the greatest enemies of the Croatian people, the Serbs, who accounted for 1/3 of population, and the Jews and Roma as the non-Aryan lower race for whom there was no place in Croatia. To achieve these objectives, the internal cleansing was also necessary, that is, all those Croatian and Muslim elements designed as traitors because of their non-Croatian behavior and considered a smear on the body of the pure Croatian nation had to be eliminated. Crimes were committed in the entire area of the independent state of Croatia throughout its existence. However, the state's most obvious involvement in crimes is shown in camps as its organized institutions intended for the extermination of some categories of the population. Although the Serbian people has suffered at various execution sites and battlefields, the execution sites of Jasenovac have been the place of its greatest destruction in its entire history. Numerous memories testify to the methods of terror and torture. All of them have one thing in common. The camps of Jasenovac were part of the system of genocide against the Serbs, Jews, and Roma, and the place of execution of all ideologically unfit members of the ruling nation, Croats and Muslims. Judging by degree of savagery, manner of execution, perversion, number and scope, crimes committed in Jasenovac's camp outstrip any human fantasy. Killing by knives, mallets, hammers, poles, axes, edges, killing by hanging, strangling, burning, by labor, hunger, thirst, infections, poisoning, cold, and killing by firearms that were considered a privilege, including torture and sadistic abuse, were everyday experience in the Jasenovac camps. The fact that the Jasenovac camps served the function of extermination people is most tellingly reflected in the suffering of children who could by no means be military or ideologically opponents. According to data collected so far by individual names, of total 24,617 children who lost their lives in German, Italian, Croatian camps in the area of the independent state of Croatia. The execution sites of Jasenovac swallowed 20,446 children, from newborns to those aged up to 14. Now I would kindly ask Vasil to run the video presentation, and Professor Mirkovic wanted to point it something of it out. F5. He wanted to mention the blue color for the population, the red one for the victims, and this gray one, this Jasenovac, in the process. These now, what you can see is from the book that Professor mentioned. Unfortunately, okay. These are the crimes from Bosnia, some of the photos. These from the Sisak near Zagreb. These are the crimes from Srebrenica, from Bosnia, indirect terror. From Herzegovina, 1941. Entire Serbian families were killed. This is Divosel Olika, a girl stabbed by knife. The Italians took the photo. On 21st of October of 2014, the City Council of Glina, Republic of Croatia, forbid the lighting of candles and laying of flowers on the place of slaughter. This is Serbian Orthodox Church in Glina. Ne mogu to naći. This is that quote, the concentration and labor camp of Jasenovac may receive a limitless number of inmates. This is Stara Gradiška. Reports on the interment of the Roma do not contain name lists, but refer to the number of wagons dispatched to Jasenovac. Many children rescued from camps could not even tell their names. This is the suffering of the Serbian Orthodox Church. The Bishop of Banja Luka, Platon, was massacred. Also Metropolitan of Dobro Bosnia, Peter, and Bishop of Gornji Karlovci, Sava, were killed. This is priest Đorđe Bogić. Churches as a place of killings, mass crimes. This is a Jewish temple from Zagreb, destroyed in 1942. You have the red color sharing the population, the blue one sharing the civilian victims, and you can see the relationship between them. Now you can see the data for the children murdered at the independent state of Croatia, current numbers. When someone dies, we pay him respect with minute of silence, silent prayer and reminiscence for 20,546 murdered children of Jasenovac. More than 342 hours, more than 14 days of silence will be needed, 1 minute for each child. Thank you for your attention. Now I'm asking Barry to...
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Mirkovic. Professor Mirkovic has given us his book, his new book. Although I love your first book, the bibliography. That's wonderful, great work of scholarship. Thank you. We're going to have a discussion period. Open the floor to questions, comments from the audience for about 20 minutes. Then we're going to have an auction of a painting donated to, and I need Joy's assistance in that. Joy, wherever you are, please come forward. But first, I will call on people in the audience who would like to make a comment. I see Danny Novak. You wanted to say something, please. Now, I'm a little worried. Do we have another mic? Do we have another mic? No? Okay.
This is just works. Do I need to press? My name is Dani Novak, and I came here from Yadovno, actually, because I found out what happened there in 2005. And then I found out what happened to my grandparents, in Jasenovac, and my uncles and so on. But I'm here for another reason. And I'm really, I feel that I owe, and that we all owe, to the world to help so it won't happen again. And how can we do it? Through education of young children. That's the only way. You know, we can have wonderful conferences, but if the young children in Croatia and in other places in the world are raised on hatred, and in the books, the history books in schools are not bringing it out, we will not succeed. So we owe it. So I propose that next year, when we have this conference again, we actually have circles of people that, like work groups, people like that talk to each other, that connect, that have connections with governments, you know, with educational institutions, and we go beyond the academical part of this, basically. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, anyone who wishes to ask a question to a particular speaker should do so also. Yanni, I know that you wanted to say something. You asked me before if you could make a brief statement or a comment on the proceedings. Yanni, I believe, is working on a Greek translation of one of our books about Jasenovac.
Hi, all of you. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Barry, for putting this forth. It is a crime, like the only crime that generations that did not actually participate in those crimes, to be accomplices, is to deny those genocides and those crimes. That makes them complicit. And I'm very, I should say, pleased to report that actually 2 days ago, the German parliament recognized the genocide of the Christian populations in Asia Minor, the first one to be committed in the 20th century. And many say that actually the Holocaust in World War II was modeled after the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian genocide in Asia Minor. And saying that, still the nation of the survivors has not recognized the Armenian genocide, and I would welcome all these people today, the survivors, the Jewish survivors of Jasenovac, to plead to the rabbis, to the political leaders in Israel. I think it's an abomination that Israel is still denying the Armenian genocide, and they should recognize it. And the same should happen for Jasenovac. So memory is the way to not only honor the victims, but also ensuring that these atrocities will not happen by anyone in the future. Thank you.
Thank Yanni, and Yanni is working on a translation of one of our books about Jasenovac into Greek, and he's a professor of physics. And Dani Novak is a professor of mathematics. And now we have a professor of history, Dr. Norman Markowitz. Please, would you? I'll bring the mic to you, Norman.
Thank you. I teach history at Rutgers. I've been involved with the Institute since the 1990s. What can I say? What can any of us say? The F word, fascism. That's what we have been hearing, the political culture of fascism, but not the political economy of fascism, not those who funded it, those who supported it. World War II, 70 million dead. Those are the new numbers. Perhaps 27 million in the Soviet Union, nearly 20 million in China. Who won the war? The Red Army of the Soviet Union, the partisans of Yugoslavia, the partisans of France, the partisans of Greece, the Red Armies of China, the Viet Minh. The Huk forces in the Philippines. World War II was won by a coalition of liberals, socialists, and communists, defeating the forces of reaction and fascism in the world. Now we jump ahead half a century, the Cold War, which poisoned the politics of the whole world. Tragically, the Cold War was won by a coalition, sadly led by our country, of conservatives, reactionaries, and fascists. That victory has poisoned the politics of the last 3 decades. The world now faces an economic crisis connected to the restoration of 19th century laissez-faire capitalism. At the same time, in places like Croatia, the Baltic states, the Ukraine, open Nazi fascist forces are seeking to advance. And they are being supported by the countries of the US NATO bloc. Okay, stop. All that I would say to you is that if we are to matter, then we must take up this struggle as Americans, as Israelis for that matter, because they have a responsibility. And by the way, Barry will be addressing these questions. Perhaps he can tell you about that. Oh, well, and
thank you, Norman. Thank you.
I'm really sorry.
We're going to have one more comment or question, and then we will have Joy say something about the auction of a painting.
Hello, I'm Frederick Schweitzer. I'm professor of history, or was. I'm emeritus at Manhattan College. I'm an historian of the Holocaust and of anti-Semitism. I testified in Toronto 8 days on the witness stand against Ernst Zundel and played a decisive role, or a leading role, in having him installed in jail when he was finally deported back to his native Germany for 5 years. I would just like to make 2 observations on the talks that we've heard so far. One that emerges is that the perpetrators do what they do as long as they think they're going to get away with it. And Professor Irving made that perfectly clear when he said that the Ustashi, when they had to vacate one camp because the Italians were taking over, did everything they could to obliterate any kind of traces or indications of their crimes. The second observation is that whether it was under German Nazi authority or under Croatian authority, the crimes they committed were legal. It was the law of the land. And I think in both instances, when these things are going on, is the time to raise the question, to make an issue of it, to make the perpetrators nervous about what's down at the end of the road for them. And I would like to say that in my teaching of the Holocaust, I did include Jasenovac. It's in Raoul Hilberg's book on the Holocaust. It's short, but it's clearly there. And that book came out in 1961 or so. So this, again, it has been known. The problem is that it takes so long, there's so much resistance to getting it broadcast so that all the world knows and all the world will not be allowed to forget. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir. And perhaps we will invite you to be a speaker at one of our next events. Next, I will have Joy Jandari talk about an auction of a painting tonight from a very important person.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Is it better? Can you hear me now? Okay. From the bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here. It's been a pleasure working with JRI and this whole organization. I just want to thank you all for supporting us. So today we're going to be having a silent auction by Eva Costabel, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. So we're going to have someone come around. You'll be having a piece of paper and a pen, and please, we'll announce the highest bid here, and the proceeds will be going to JRI for our next event. So I just want to thank you all for all your support, and hope you had a wonderful evening. Thank you again.
Thank you, Joy. This is one of many paintings by Eva Costabel, who has been a lifelong painter. In fact, was a painter and artist in the camps, and her artwork from the camps is internationally known, as a matter of fact. So she's a internationally recognized artist. This small canvas is, I believe it's oil painting on a canvas. And so Joy and others will bring around paper, and if you wish to bid on it and purchase it, that money will then go to JRI. Eva has donated this painting for this evening. So thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. While we are doing that, I would like to move to our next speaker, Professor Robert McCormick, who has written a very, very important new book on Ante Pavelić and Croatia under Pavelić, which is for sale in our literature table. And really, Dr. McCormick represents, as a professor at University of South Carolina, someone that we've been waiting for a very long time to emerge in the scholarship of the Holocaust and World War II. The fact that we have Dr. McCormick here is, I think, it represents progress, that such a person has stepped forward and has done this remarkable work, and we're very grateful to him. So without further ado, Dr. Robert McCormick.
I am not Serbian or Croatian in ancestry at all. I'm a Southerner. My dad was a Baptist minister. I have no axe to grind in this whatsoever. I had never heard of Ante Pavelić until I was a graduate student. And my professor was talking about it, and I was amazed I'd never heard about Ante Pavelić in my entire life. And at that point, I became really very much not just interested, but obsessed with Yugoslavia in that era, as well as Pavelić's career. And I've spent many, many years working on that. Tonight, what I really want to do is a couple of things. One, I want to say a few remarks about what the United States and the West knew about atrocities being conducted in Croatia under the independent state of Croatia. That's one part of it. And the other part of it, I'd like to say a few things as well about Pavelić himself and his escape from Europe to South America, and the culpability that many people have in that escape. And that includes, unfortunately, the United States, that includes the Vatican, and it also includes, to some degree, the British government as well. And the record is very, very clear in those matters. But to start with today, I'd like to say a few things, of course, here about what the Americans and the British knew about atrocities. We like to think that Western governments didn't know what was going on, and it was something that came upon much later in the war. That is not true. No, it's not true at all. The record's very clear. If you look at State Department documents, as early as June 1941, the first executions had occurred in April of 1941. As early as June of 1941, information began to be coming into the State Department about atrocities being carried out in this alleged independent state of Croatia. This information was remarkably accurate. And there was a steady stream of information throughout 1941, 42, 43 about what was happening, much of it coming from businessmen. We usually don't think of businessmen traveling through areas that were war zones, but this was actually not an unusual occurrence. And so we see this record of information. Sometimes the numbers are way off, that's true, but the basic evidence is very, very clear. The U.S. government chose to do nothing. It made that decision because it was concerned that Croatian Americans and Serbian Americans, especially those living in Pittsburgh, Youngstown, Ohio, and places like this, that that if this information was made known, friction would then develop and it would damage the American World War effort. Elmer Davis, Office of War Information, went to great lengths to make sure that information about what was being carried out in the independent state of Croatia did not gain much attention. You do see it occasionally in newspapers, but very little is said. And that is even after knowing, of course, that Pavlic had declared war on the United States in December of 1941. So this was actually a combatant against the United States, which makes it even more interesting and more important to understand. With that information, there was clear knowledge that Pavlic here was a war criminal, especially after, I don't want to get too detailed in it, the Moscow Declaration of 43. But what this is, it's clear understanding that Pavlic is a war criminal. But in 1945, after the war, when Pavlic makes his way into Austria, and it's a very complex escape route that is still very difficult to, it's still extremely difficult to determine the exact route of his escape. But nonetheless, it is very clear that the United States understands at times where Pavlic is. There is a rumor, I can't substantiate it, and I don't think anyone may ever be able to substantiate it, that he was captured by the British. He may have bought himself out of captivity. I can't prove it, and I'm not sure we'll ever be able to prove it. There is a document that says that he was in an American internment camp. I can't prove that. It's one document, but I can't prove it. There are lots of DPs, you have to remember. There are almost 15 million DPs at this time, displaced persons in Europe. But what we do know is that by 1947, Pavlic had made his way into Italy and was being protected at San Girolamo, which is in Rome, and was basically the Croatian seminary in Rome. The evidence of this is overwhelming. We have U.S. documents from the Counterintelligence Corps. We have State Department documents. I interviewed a man an American officer who was involved in this investigation. We know he was being held at San Girolamo. They refuse to speak about this today. I've made requests of them for interviews, but they will not speak with me at all. Unfortunately, the problem with that is that was on Vatican soil. And it meant that the United States authorities now had sort of a convenient excuse not to go after him because, we would damage the Vatican's property, that we don't have the right to go on the Vatican soil. Even when he went in transit, he traveled in a Vatican car. There was a rumor for a long time that the British government was deeply involved in protecting him. The British Army may have been involved, but the Foreign Office was not. They're surprised by this, and actually they pursue him more vigorously than the Americans. What the Americans are now concerned with, and it's not said perfectly in documents, but what they are concerned with is the Cold War. And I want to read you a couple of things here, quotes that I think are really extremely significant. The American, I want to read one quote from Bishop Hurley, Patrick Hurley, who was the American, he was actually an American, but he was in the Vatican at this time. And he's speaking to an American State Department official in Yugoslavia. And listen to what he said. It would be terrible to turn anyone over to this country, Yugoslavia. He's speaking directly about Pavlic. We protect our own, no matter how guilty. that surprised John Cabot, who was the American charge d'affaires in Yugoslavia. But Cabot had already figured out in 1947 what was happening. And I want to read you a couple of quotes, one here from Cabot. This is from 1947, and this is a memo sent to the State Department. We are apparently conniving with the Vatican and Argentina to get guilty people to haven in latter country. I sincerely hope I am mistaken, particularly regarding latter point. He wasn't mistaken. The United States was conniving to get Pavlich out of Europe through what was called the rat line. Reverend Krunoslav Draganovic, who was actually this time he was the Croatian official to the International Red Cross, was deeply involved in protecting not only Pavlich, but protecting many other notable Ustasha figures. The deal was simply a dirty, dirty deal. The United States used Draganovic in this fashion. We turn the other way when you want to get someone out of Europe, if you'll help us get some other people with dodgy pasts out of Europe. As the man who came up with this system called the rat line said, the agreement consists of mutual assistance. These agents assist persons of interest to Father Draganovic to leave Germany, and in turn, Father Draganovic will assist the agents in obtaining the necessary visas to Argentina for persons of interest to the command. The United States was worried about the Cold War. It didn't matter really what Pavlich had done anymore. Americans saw it as we never really fought them directly. We never really fought the NDH directly. We were fighting the Germans. And so what Pavlich and others did isn't quite that significant. The concern was, of course, in Italy as well, that it might go communist in 1947. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen, that it doesn't go communist. There was also a desire to destabilize the emerging Tito government. Pavlich could be a useful tool in destabilizing that Yugoslav government because it was, of course, a communist regime. And so why don't we hold somebody like this on ice? You know, we can get him out of Europe and get him to South America, where he eventually does go. It's very, very clear the Vatican was deeply involved in this. The documents are clearly there. Unfortunately, in American documents, I can't pinpoint exactly who's calling the shots. There's still documents that I can't see through Freedom of Information requests. It's clearly goes pretty high, but I can't pinpoint the exact American officials. But the decision is made to ignore Pavlich and to make and simply allow him to go from Genoa ultimately to Argentina, where he actually lives in the open. He lives in the open in Argentina. And of course, in 1957, there's an attempt on his life. He's badly wounded, and he was actually coming back from a celebration of the establishment of the NDH. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But he escapes 2 days later, goes to Spain, ultimately crosses, it appears he goes to Chile first. And I've got a little bit of evidence that says he perhaps goes to the Middle East. I can't prove it, but he does end up in Madrid. And suitably enough, he does die in 1959 in the German hospital in Madrid. How ironic is that? The man who played ball with Hitler dies in the German hospital in Madrid. The story in this very short presentation, the point I really want to make to you is it didn't go away because we didn't go after these kinds of people with zeal. We allowed the reputation of Pavlich and all of his minions to be reborn, and especially reborn in the 1990s and all the way up to today. If you can do a Google search of the rock band Thompson, and you can look at the lyrics of this band. It's a rebirth of the Ustasha movement. You can go to Croatia and see the U's tattooed on young men. You'll see U, the Ustasha U, in a bar, in a place like that. If we didn't go after it, well, it must not have been very big. It must be that these people were sort of okay, and we can recast them now into heroes for our new cause. So the great significance I just want to leave with you is we can't, as was said earlier, we can't ignore these types of war crimes. If we do, we certainly reap the terrible, terrible things that comes from them. The Ustasha movement was very much kept alive in the 1930s because of Ustasha sympathizers in the United States. Not only was money siphoned off to defend Pavlich after the 1934 assassination of Alexander I, not only was it used then, it was used in 1936 as well. Ante Doshin was deeply involved, one of these people, in printing, publishing materials, sending it over across to Europe. And so there is a long history of involvement from North America with this type of movement.
Petra, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. So I do have a Jewish last name, if you're wondering. That's because my husband is Jewish. I am Romani. You may know us as Gypsies or Tsigane, but we call ourselves Roma. I'm on the board of directors of an American organization called Voice of Roma. We provide education, including events such as this. Simon Wiesenthal once wrote that Hitler would have killed 6 million gypsies had there been that many. He argued that the percentages of losses in the Romani population were similar in proportion to those of the Jews. I come from a family of Romani victims and survivors. These are my ancestors in the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic was one of the countries where 90% or more of the Romani people living there at the time of the war were exterminated. This means that my very existence is a miracle. It's something of a cliche to call the Romani genocide the forgotten Holocaust. People get this idea that we are not educated, we do not write, we do not remember, we do not speak about it. This is not true. This is not true. I may be the first openly Romani person to have a PhD from Harvard, but there's another person right now with a doctorate teaching at Harvard University. We have writers, we have speakers, we have historians, we have poets, we have many, many memoirs about the Holocaust. The fact that nobody's ever heard of these is not because they don't exist. There's the question about numbers. I can go on about that. In Yugoslavia alone, the recent estimates are there are about 90,000 Roma who were killed during World War II. And the reason we want people to remember are the similar reasons why everybody else wants the public to remember. For us, right now in Europe, we are subject to continuing and rising and strengthening neo-Nazi movements and activities having to do with their sympathizers. So if I told you some of the things that had happened in the Czech Republic to my own children, you wouldn't believe me. You would say they're too young and too cute, maybe. You wouldn't believe me. But these things are happening. People are in danger. There's segregation, there's discrimination. This goes on with the same kind of ideology saying that we are racially inferior. So I will keep it brief. I just want to say that when people say that Roma don't remember this or have no history and have no commemoration, it's not true. In 1971, we had the first World Romani Congress, 1971 in London. And there I obviously wasn't there, but the delegates at the time instituted a flag and an anthem. And that anthem actually was based on a Balkan melody that you may recognize. And the second verse of that anthem references the crimes of the Ustasha. It talks about the Black Legion, Kali Legia, that's the Ustasha. And so I just want to sing you that verse of our official international Romani anthem. Di mansasiek bari familia Edem murdar dale ne calilegia Ed saren cinde oromnia viromen Edem maşkarlende vitzik ne çavoren Ay Romale Ay Chavale